So, welcome everyone to our Study Abroad podcast series. So, today we have Kavya, who is in London, who is studying at UCL, and she's from India, and we'll be knowing about her journey from India to London. So, welcome, Kavya.
Hi, thanks for having me on here.
Okay. So, Kavya, please tell us a bit about your school days, how you were as a student, and I see that you were a head girl at your school for like 1 year or so, and then you have done a lot of other extracurricular activities. So you have,
Mhm.
done a lot of side things, extracurricular things. So please enlighten us a bit.
Yeah, sure. I'll just give you a background on sort of the curriculum that I did. So, up until grade 10, so 10 standard, I basically just did CBSE. And even during my CBSE year, and then in 11th and 12th, I did the IB diploma program, which is an international curriculum. And even during my CBSE years, I would say I was someone that, I was interested in extracurricular opportunities, anything that I could sort of get involved in, be it like annual day practices or performances, to participating in school competitions and stuff like that. I think although there was no big position, or there was no um, like tangible outcome that I can add to my CV or something like that. I think the exploratory aspect in and of itself, I would say, allowed me to be um, inquisitive and find my strengths, so that when it came to 11th and 12th, and when it came to being at UCL and having bigger opportunities, I was able to identify exactly what my strengths and weaknesses were, so that I could hone in on that. And then, yeah, in 11th and 12th grade, in I moved to a different school and I did the international curriculum. And in that, during that experience, I was the cultural secretary of my school during 11th grade, which just involved me setting up events in my school, liaising with other schools, event management, organization, all that sort of stuff. And then in 12th grade, I was the head girl, which meant sort of coordinating between all other positions, representing the school, taking on leadership, making sure that everyone in the school just liked the opportunities and felt well represented and things like that. And I would say the best thing that I did was to just put myself forth. So when I applied for these positions, it was never with the certainty of like, I am going to get this, and this is exactly what I'm going to do. I think it was, I this is something that really appeals to me, and I think I'd be good at it, and I'm going to give it a shot. And I think you can never go wrong with giving things a shot. And that's precisely what I did. And then I think these opportunities of being a cultural secretary and the head girl also neatly segued into the other projects that I've done with being involved in MUNs. So funnily enough, I actually had no MUN exposure or practice until I moved to the international school. And yet, I think even with the little exposure that I quickly gained from being in the international school, I was able to be confident in representing my school as the MUN sort of rep, right? And then um, the MUN exposure, along with the event management exposure that I had, I sort of merged those two worlds, and I became really good at being the MUN rep and finding more MUN opportunities and things like that. Um, and it was a very small school, mind you. Like, a lot of the opportunities that um, sort of exist now, so to speak, most of them were set up either very recently to before I joined, or by me myself. So I would say to other students who are aspiring, who are in a position, who want to like study abroad, um, don't get thrown off by the fact that I'm saying, I've been to MUNs, or I've been the head girl or cultural secretary. If in case you feel like you don't have that exact exposure, I think I created a lot of the opportunities for myself in that school. Obviously, I was privileged enough to be in a school where they allowed for that to happen. But if you think you can be that sort of a person, go up to teachers who know will support you, who know kind of like you, who know someone else in the school, and have a conversation with them saying, hey, I like this concept of MUNs. I want to go to MUNs. Can someone else set this up, or can I set this up? And yeah, I think the biggest takeaway from my entire talk, you will realize, is just try. Don't be afraid of trying things and just giving things a go. You never know what is going to lead to where. And yeah, so I was doing that. very active in the MUN circuit. I liked debate in general. So that was something I explored in my CBSE school days, wherein I was part of debate clubs, and I really knew that I liked public speaking and debating. And that then I was able to take that strength and make something of it when the opportunity presented itself. Yeah, I guess those are like the big takeaways of things that I did in school.
So I guess what I recollect, what I collect from this is you are very experimental in your approaches. That let's try this, let's try that, and then which with each try you realize that okay, this is your strength or weakness, or this is like a neutral thing for you. So what I also
Yes.
realize is you see this public speaking as one of your strength, right? And
Yes, I do.
then you took this admission in this biology thing, which is a
Hmm.
bit on the the other experimental side. It doesn't maybe require a lot of verbal things at the initial stage. So how did you,
Hmm.
or when was the very first time you thought that okay, maybe I should go abroad for my bachelor's and all, and what was the when was this thought incepted in your mind the very first time?
Right. So for me, it is a sort of slightly unique case, I suppose, wherein I never had like a very clear cut goal. In hindsight, I think having had that goal of like, I want to go abroad would have made things easier. I would have curated my application, so to speak. But also, I guess, I realized that I wanted to go abroad only after I joined the international school. So it was a case of serendipity, really, of being like, my parents so happened to move to Australia, and but I had to stay back in India for the last 2 years, and I sort of realized, okay, well, my parents are working in Australia. Well, if I went there, then having some international exposure would be good. But I don't think I really had very much clarity when I started off. It was a case of serendipity where things did work out for me. Um, but again, like the possibility, like having the possibility of studying abroad and trying out a new curriculum, I took that opportunity. And being in that environment, I think where everyone else around me knew what they wanted to do, they had a plan, that forced me to also get a plan eventually. So being in certain environments definitely shapes how you start approaching things, and that was certainly the case for me with my study abroad experience. And to address the biology part of things, I would say even from my CBSE days, I was more STEM inclined than humanities or arts, at least from a career and like education perspective. And I think slowly just being curious even in the classroom, identifying. So I initially liked chemistry, but now I'm doing biology, right? And in chemistry, I identified what were the things about chemistry that I liked, and having that awareness made me identify the same things that I liked in parts of biology. And then I was like, well, I see more scope and like interest for myself in biology actually. And then I sort of like jumped on that at university. And I mean, my public speaking days haven't gone today. Even at UCL, I give campus tours. I am part of undergraduate like admissions team, so like I still speak with students. The job that I do, even working in my university's cafe, it's a very customer facing job, so I talk to people. I worked a part time job where I kind of mentored students. And I delivered seminars, and it was, like a class of 50 people, and then I'd be the one person talking to them. So public speaking is still very much a part of my life. It's just outside of my academic sort of aspirations, I guess.
So I guess it stayed as a extracurricular now also.
Yes.
Sure. So your parents moved to Australia, right? So
Mhm.
which were the countries you were planning to go after your 12th? Was Australia also on the list, or only UK, or what
Yes.
other countries?
Yes. So Australia was definitely one of the first countries I considered, considering that my parents were there. And I graduated in 2020, May of 2020. So I was that batch. And then COVID happened. I always planned on taking a gap year, which is what I did also. I had different plans for my gap year, but COVID happened and I was forced to stay in the country as opposed to going back and, living with my parents in Australia. I think had I lived in Australia and had I felt more comfortable with the city, had I felt more connected, maybe my choice would have been different. Maybe I would have stayed in Australia. But outside of Australia, I was also looking at the UK and the US, and those are countries where I ultimately ended up applying. The decision to apply to these specific countries was motivated by a language factor. So I don't know any other non-Indian language outside of English. I had no French, like none of these European languages. The only language I speak are my mother tongue, Hindi, Kannada, and like basically the cities that I've been in, I've picked up those languages within India, and that's it. So yeah, I think it was very clear cut that I wanted to stay in an English speaking country. And on top of that, I looked at the career prospects for my specific field. So I did know that I want to get into research, say, for instance. And I looked at, well, which government is spending how much on research infrastructure? What are the opportunities like? What are the international student career prospects, growth prospects for this sector like? And so I, yeah, ended up narrowing it down to Australia, UK, and the US. And finally, had I been able to be in Australia that 1 year and convert to a permanent resident visa like my parents, that would have given me an edge in terms of finances to stay in Australia. But at the end of the day, it became a thing of, well, I would be an international student no matter which country I applied to. And then it just like I just started picking on the nitty gritties of which city do I want to be at, which university ranks better. I do want to like say a caveat: rankings are not everything. If you're looking at top 100, top 200 universities overall, you're in a good place to begin with already, because I had a lot of criteria that was already met. Then it became a filtering process, and it so
Sure.
happened that I had the I had the academic background to apply to UCL, and I did so.
So how many colleges you ended up applying to? Five, 10, like some numbers you remember?
I applied to a lot. So I applied to 13 colleges in the US and 5 in the UK.
Okay, okay. So 18 colleges. So two countries or two regions were clear, UK and US, right? You applied to
Yes.
only these. So you didn't even apply to one college of Australia, is it?
No, I did not. In the end, I did not.
So were your parents mad about it, or they were supportive that okay, you
I
learn
think
more.
they were a little I think they were a little upset, especially considering that I am my mother's daughter and she loves me a lot and she would love to keep me very close if she can. But no, I think at the end of the day, they were very understanding of my reasoning for why I picked the UK. And it was a little hard for them to swallow that pill of, oh no, she's not going to be with me for more years. But then they were supportive at the end, very supportive.
So there was another opportunity for them. They can visit UK anytime now.
Yep.
Okay. So this was the, let's say, the region you decided, and you applied to all these colleges in the top list probably. Why biology? Like, was biology as a subject you took as a subject in your 11th, 12th, and you were like, you pretty much eliminated all other options, or biology was the, I mean, one of the options that you were considering?
Yeah. So I do have to preface by sort of giving you a background on the IB in itself. So with say if you did A levels, right, as an international curriculum, you would only pick three subjects, whereas in the IB it is six subjects that you pick. So kind of similar to CBSE in a way. And I the I guess the subjects that count for admission, at least in the UK, would be these three subjects called higher level subjects. So I picked biology, chemistry, and English, language and literature as my higher level subjects, which basically meant that I had identified at that point in time that if I did something, these are the subjects that interest me, and this is what I would do. English, I suppose I did it because I just like it, not necessarily with the goal of anything. But there is something to be said about, if you pick a specific course, you do need to have specific subject combinations. So if I wanted to do medicine, for instance, my biochemistry English combination would not work because I need to have math instead of English as a higher level subject. So I think when picking these subjects, I had to already make a preliminary elimination of what are the areas that I don't want to do, and what are the areas I might want to do. And at that point in time, I knew I didn't want to do medicine or engineering. Instead, I was looking more towards research as a whole. And it was between chemical research and biological research, I would say. And I gave myself the opportunity to be exposed to that with my subject combinations as well. But then at the end of the day, I think I just doing like through school, I just realized biology was a better fit for me, and that's what I ended up applying to.
So you eliminated some options, and then you also see like your interest, and then finally biology emerged as the topmost. Like, okay, fine, biology,
Yes.
done.
Yeah.
Sure, sure, sure. So this 18 colleges, 13 in US and 5 in UK, all were biology major, or it was a variation of biology in some ways?
No, it was all biology majors across the board. Yeah, I guess there was some maybe like differences in specialization with Edinburgh and King's. I remember Edinburgh, I applied to a very specific course. King's also I applied to a very specific course, and it was biological sciences, molecular genetics specialization. You don't have to. I already knew what I wanted to, and because there was that opportunity to specialize in something so specific that I liked, I applied for that. But they were all in the general vein of biology, cell biology, something like that.
Sure, sure, sure. Then UCL was the obvious choice for you because of its like the top rank and the like in London probably.
Yeah, I think I did favor being in London more as a city because of the opportunities, just the ecosystem that you're surrounded by. And on top of that, it was specifically UCL. I mean, rank. See, at the end of the day, I actually decided between UCL and King's. The final choices were between UCL and King's. And although I had Edinburgh, which was technically higher ranked than King's, if you look at it from a pure rankings perspective, I eliminated Edinburgh. So it didn't come down to purely rankings. At the end of the day, it was about, if I studied in Scotland, it would be a 4-year course for a BSc. Whereas in the UK, you have the opportunity to do a BSc in 3 years and a master's in 1 year. So things like that also came into play. And also it was, the fact that King's offered such a specialized course. And with UCL, there was more flexibility with, what you could specialize in. I ended up choosing UCL actually because it gave me the flexibility, funnily enough, although I was so fixated on the specificity initially. And then a big reason why I applied to UCL was the research that they were doing. So I put a lot of time and effort into researching the kind of research that was happening because that's something I want to get into. And the specific niche of research with cell and gene therapies, UCL is a pioneer really in all of Europe. And although my course didn't directly intersect with that, even having the exposure, even being in the vicinity of this kind of research, I thought would be valuable. And I picked UCL at the end.
Sure, sure. And I see that you are doing an integrated MSc kind of thing. So it's like 3 year plus 1 year, 4 year. You're finishing both. So did you apply to this
Yeah.
4 year program, or you upgraded this after you came there?
So I applied to the 4-year program because I knew I wanted to do a master's anyway, right from the start, considering the nature of research that I was going to get into. But I don't think it makes any difference from admission perspective. So you don't get treated differently if you apply to a BSc or an MSci from an admissions lens, and you also have the opportunity to upgrade to a master's all the way up until the end of your second year. So it's by the start of the third year, you basically need to know if you're going to do the masters or not, because there's something, in the specificity of like the things that you have to fulfill in your third year if you're doing a master's. Um, but yeah, it doesn't really make a difference. But I personally did know I wanted to do the masters.
So you were very clear about this from the very beginning, whereas other people decided midway.
Yeah, yeah.
So do you see your past experience as one of the positive side, and like the way you have framed yourself, since childhood, made you a very good decision maker, and you are like your clarity is probably way above your peers.
It's funny you bring that because I would not necessarily call myself the most decisive person. Maybe when it comes to the bigger things, I think I know that I am an indecisive person in general. So when it comes to the decisions that are like big decisions, life altering decisions, I like just sit with it. I take more time. I'm a little more intentional about making sure that I am making good decisions. But no, in general, I wouldn't say I am the most decisive person ever. um, I think I just, like I told you, right? Even coming to study abroad was not necessarily something I had clarity to begin with. I kind of just joined an international school and I was like, okay, go figure, I guess. Um, yeah, I think I have to acknowledge there is some part of, there is a lot of hard work, obviously, right? Like the leap from CBSE to IB is pretty huge. So there was a lot of hard work. There was a lot of doing poorly, and then having to pick myself back up. And so, say for instance, with English, I would say I've always been a pretty good student in the subject of English, and I've scored consistently high during my CBSE years. And then taking English as a high level subject in the IB, I I scored a grade that was so low it shocked me. And I think for a little while I was in that shock and I didn't really do much with it. But then after a while, you just have to pick yourself up. So there's definitely a hard work component, but there is also definitely a component of luck that we cannot dismiss. So, but I say luck favors the prepared. So if you're prepared and if you work hard enough, you're going to increase your chances of luck from like working for you from like 10% to say 90%. So don't be disheartened hearing me say there was luck. It's a factor. It's important to acknowledge that as a factor, because at the end of the day, if it doesn't work out and you feel like you put all this hard work, it's not your fault. It is just that sometimes things don't work out. But yeah, I think also having that little bit of luck play in helped with the decision making process.
Sure, sure. So I guess you are more of a learning by experiment person,
Absolutely.
and that's where biology fits very well.
Exactly. That's where being a researcher fits really well.
Sure, sure. So when you take this 4 year course, do you also have an option to downgrade to 3 year or nothing like that?
Oh yeah, we do. We absolutely do. So even though in my third year I did the combinations that I would need to. So like right now, today is my first day of university in my fourth year technically, right? So even right now, I have the opportunity to go up to my admin and be like, hey, I don't want to do this. I'm dropping out. I'm ending, and I would still come out of it with a BSc. Although I've done the prerequisites and the modules that would qualify me for doing the integrated master. So at any point in time, you can switch back and forth between the BSc to MSci.
Sure, sure, sure. And the last year of this, the final year, you have to do like a bit of a research work also, like a thesis,
Mhm.
project, final year
Yeah.
project, etc.
Yeah, it's a dissertation. So there's a huge research component in the final year. I would say 75% of the final year is actually just the grades from the research when you look at it from a weighting perspective. Um, but I guess the advantage with an MSci is also that you have a greater concentration on the research. So if you did a separate master's, you would have a 50-50 split of having to juggle modules alongside with 50% research project. Whereas in this, it's a bit more clear. There's a more defined focus, and you just focus on this one big thing, your master's project and research, and sort of get done with it. Yeah.
Sure, sure, sure. And when you are coming to London, was that your first trip to London or you have been to London before?
It was my first trip. It was my first trip to the UK in general.
Did anyone accompany you together or you flight
No,
solo?
I came here by myself. So I have had some experience traveling, or I mean going to places alone. There'll always be family over there to pick me or something. So the thought of traveling alone didn't scare me, but the thought of settling down alone was definitely, it was scary.
Okay, okay, sure. So which flight did you take from India? How did you fly?
I think I did Etihad, if I remember.
Starting from which was your nearest airport that you took the flight
So
from?
I'm from I was living in Chennai the last few years. So I flew from, I think I did Chennai to Abu Dhabi and Abu Dhabi to London.
And when you landed in London the first time, did anything surprise you?
The weather. I would say the weather is, I mean, I think you always come prepared, right? Knowing that the UK as a country is a colder country, especially in Chennai, like it's a coastal city, it's hot, it's humid. So I'm originally from Bangalore. So I've spent, I would say, the majority of my life in Bangalore actually. But then, last few years of my life, I was in Chennai. So I adapted to the hot, humid climate. And moving back to a very cold climate, kind of almost a little bit on the extreme end, was a huge shock. But surprisingly, you get used to it. And I would say the big thing is sun more than the coldness. It's just the sun, the lack of sun. I'm someone who's very driven by like brightness around me. And in London you get limited sun, especially when you come land. It's the fall semester, winter semester, right? So you're thrown on the deeper end of things. You just have to learn to like deal with limited sun. In the winters the sun sets at 4 p.m. and it gets like pitch dark very quickly. And then in the summer, the sun's out until 8, 9 p.m. So you lose perspective of time in the day. And so you have to be sort of very on top of your own schedule. And I would say that was one of the hardest things in my first year to um, keep track of. It's just having a very proper schedule, like structuring your day out by yourself without having someone else to tell you to do that. Because, and this is something I heard a lot in my school, right? My teachers would say, we spoon feed you guys everything. We tell you do this, do that. In college, no one's gonna like be on top of you. And that is very much true. I think a lot of international students would agree in general across the board, be it Australia, UK, Canada, US, wherever you go. There is a bigger independent study component. You have to be on top of your own work by yourself. And that's definitely true even when it comes to like stuff outside of academics. So it's up to you whether you're going to wake up at 9 a.m. and sleep like on time at a sane period of time, even though you have lectures only at 3 p.m. that day, instead of being in bed until 12 and then waking up. And then if you wake up at 12, you're going to get 4 hours of sun in the winters, and that's not really great for like motivation and things like that, right? So it is up to you to be responsible and make the decisions that are best for you.
Sure, sure. What about your accommodation? How did you book your initial accommodation?
So I stayed in my university's student halls. So I applied to the through the accommodation portal that was there as part of my university's accommodation offerings. And then it is quite common, at least in the UK, it is quite common for students to live in student accommodation the first year, until and unless they are people who live very close to uni. Sometimes even students who live in London, just for the experience of living with friends, they do like to stay at student accommodation. And I would say out of all other years, first year is going to be the most social year as well. So students really like to take advantage of that. Second year I rented a flat with my friends, and that's also very common. From second year onwards, students usually rent flats. And then my third and fourth year, I've moved back to accommodation, and this was private accommodation that I just found from like the internet googling. There are loads of agents as well who advertise these accommodations. You don't necessarily have to go with what the agent says. You can just speak to an agent and see what options they're going to give you. If you like it, you can go ahead. If you like it, you can still go ahead without the agent. You can still like contact the accommodation on your own, see what that's like. So yeah, there are loads of opportunities. And in third and fourth year, I realized that for me, I think staying in a student accommodation worked better. So yeah.
Sure, sure. And what about cooking? You had to cook all these years, or you had some meal plans?
I stayed in a self-catered accommodation all the while. I personally love cooking. I've been cooking since I was 8 years old. An alternative career path for me was actually becoming a chef. So I love to cook. At the age of 10, I was like, I'm gonna be a chef, mom. But no, I decided against that, evidently. But yeah, no, I love to cook. So cooking it was a given that I was going to be in a self-catered accommodation. But also part of the study abroad experience is making a few bad dishes, burning your plates, burning your crockery, making biryani and telling it to all your friends and being like, look, I made biryani. And yeah, I think it was no different for me, although I had cooked.
So when you cook, is it like sometimes you cook for like 5, 10 people also, and then you invite them, and then you get lot of praises about your dishes?
Very rarely I have done that. I didn't want to toot my own horn, but now that you bring it up, yeah, I mean, sometimes I do like to cook for my friends. I like having people over for dinner parties and stuff. But it is a lot of cleanup and administrative overload also, so I don't do it very frequently. But yeah, I like cooking. Like I usually cook for like in second year when I lived with my friends. Sometimes if my friends are not feeling up to it, I'll just make something for them also. So yeah.
Sure, sure. So regarding the, the praising ourselves, what I advise people is we should always praise ourselves because the whole world is there to insult us anyways.
That is certainly a perspective.
Sure, sure. Okay. So coming to the other path, other things, other questions. So you did a lot of part-time jobs and internships, etc. So probably you went through a lot of rejections also finding those, right? So how was your rejection handling ability changed with time?
Hmm. I would say when it came to part-time jobs, I I've done three part-time jobs, I suppose. One is through an app where you kind of don't really need a lot of qualifications. Anyone can really do it. Um, so I didn't like necessarily face rejection. The second job was a public speaking job that I had done, and because I've already had extensive experience with public speaking, that was a job I got as well. And the barista, the cafe job that I'm currently doing, the previous experience with waitressing through that app that I mentioned helped me get this job. So when it came to part-time jobs, I haven't faced rejection, but I have faced rejection when it came to internships. So applying for summer internships, it is an excruciating process. And I know I'm going to get started on applying for full-time jobs soon, and I very much expect rejection to be a part of the journey. Also rejection when it comes to applying to universities even, right? In America, a lot of the universities that I applied to, I was rejected by most of them. So I think you get excited, but you also very quickly learn that rejection is a that it's part of the nature of trying. And because I am someone that likes to try and give things a shot, you have to acknowledge the fact that it is a part of the journey, because otherwise it can very easily demotivate you from even wanting to try. I have been in that headspace, of being like, I don't even want to try, what's the point? But over time you learn that that's not the way, because even that one success will make those so many rejections worth the try. And there's always something you learn from a rejection. So like maybe immediately you don't realize it, but even say for instance, last year I was going through some of my application responses when I applied to the US, and I got rejected by a lot of those universities. And back then I was a little upset, I was like, oh, why didn't I get in? But looking back, and immediately I didn't know what was the things that I wasn't so good at in my application. But then looking back now, I can look at those things and clearly point out, this is what I should have improved, and this is what, this and that. And I didn't look at the applications that I was successful for, right? So it's always rejection that teaches us more than, I suppose, the successes. And it's the same for internship applications. Especially in London, it's so competitive, it's second nature to get rejected, so you it gets very easily desensitized.
Sure, sure, sure. And when you were applying to universities, you had to probably go through some tests like SAT and GRE, TOEFL. Not GRE maybe for you because bachelor's. What test did you go through?
So I only did the SAT for the US. I did SAT, the standard SATs and subject tests in biology and chemistry, simply because I wanted to. For the UK, I didn't necessarily need to give any other tests because of the nature of my international curriculum. So a lot of students would have to give IELTS or TOEFL for applying to the UK for English proficiency. But because of my curriculum and because I did English at higher level, that in itself was an alternative qualification that made me eligible. So I didn't have to do that. But yeah, with the SATs, I think A lot of students, surprisingly, a lot of students who want to apply for STEM subjects, they prefer taking the ACT over the SAT because there is a science component. I think I just pref- because I was doing SAT biology and chemistry already, I had the science tests to prepare for. I didn't want something additional to prepare with the ACT, so I just did the SAT subject test, which tests your English and math aptitude. And for that, I didn't like do any extra coaching. I didn't spend a dime on anything. I contacted my friends, borrowed SAT prep books, got second hand prep books, and I completely like self studied for it.
Okay, so Kavya, my next question to you is that you would have done some letter of recommendation and statement of purpose for your application. So can you throw some light on that?
Yes. So for the UK, it's a personal statement at the undergrad level and a statement of purpose for masters. The slight difference is that statement of purpose is a little more geared towards the specific course, and it's more academic career oriented. I would say in general for the UK, it is a little more on the academic side. A personal statement is it gives you the leeway to, I guess, describe a story of it's a little more personal, right? Of how you went on this journey to finally realize that this is the area that you want to specialize in, given that it's undergrad. So it's more explorative. So yeah, I did a personal statement because I was applying for the undergrad. But the US, because if I also did US applications, there are loads of essays, almost every single university that you apply to. So another thing I do need to mention is with the UK, you apply through one portal, which is the UCAS, and one essay or one personal statement gets sent to all five universities. So please do not, if you are applying to the UK, please do not specify the name of a university in your personal statement, because it is going to go to all universities and you don't want kings knowing that you're applying to Edinburgh and you might prefer them. Right? So there's that. But also with the US, on the other hand, although you can apply through a common portal called the Common App, there still are specific applications for every single university that you apply to, and every application has specific prompts for which you have to write essays. So that's a little different compared to personal statement or statement of purpose. And yeah, I had to write multiple, I think I wrote something like close to 60 different responses over the course of the 18 universities that I applied to. So get used to writing and expressing yourself and communicating your thoughts, at least on paper, even if you're not comfortable doing that in front of an audience.
Oh, yeah, so what about the LOR thing, letter of recommendations?
Yeah, so I had to submit LORs as well as part of both my UK and my US applications. And I think with the UK applications, I had to provide two, if I'm not wrong. And with the US application, it depends on the university that you're applying to because the applications are individual. With LORs, I would recommend that students get in touch with the teachers that they feel confident that they have the best connection with, so that the teachers know the most to speak about that student. So if you're applying for biological sciences, right, like myself, instead of just relying on a bio teacher and a chem teacher, say for instance, because bio and chem are my main subjects, I got a letter of recommendation from my math teacher, I think, who was my class teacher, and my bio teacher for the UK applications, because he knows me day in and day out, right? He's my class teacher. He knows all the initiatives that I've been part of, how I am in the classroom as a person, and he was able to speak to just who I am as a person in the classroom, even outside of mathematical aptitude. Although I took math only as a standard level subject, and that doesn't have as much strength in my UK applications. In my US university applications, I did my English teacher as well because she also knew me in a very different capacity. That's one of my major subjects. So outside of biology, I had these letters of recommendation. And I had a letter of recommendation from like my principal that I needed to give for the UK application. I also had a letter of recommendation from like an internship that I did during my gap year, and that was just unpaid, voluntary, right? So it depends on which application you're submitting, who you want to speak to, what abilities, and you just tweak it and get in touch with those specific types of people.
And it will be wise to do some internships and project work, volunteer work, etc. as part of your profile building so that you can actually approach more people for all this.
Yeah, I think it adds to the strength of your application. But at the undergrad level, especially with UK universities, they are very understanding of the fact that not every student is going to have the experience, the opportunity. And because we don't have the experience, you're not going to get the opportunity, right? Because we're in an experience driven market. So I would say UK universities are very understanding if you don't have extensive experience. It is always good, like you say, to have something to do. Is if volunteer experiences always show leadership, always show initiative, and those are soft skills that you want to demonstrate in your application. It doesn't have to be like solving this big thing, right? It's something like, I during COVID time, I like did a little thing with my neighbors. I checked in on them. I made sure that I started this little initiative in my apartment. Even something like that is worth putting on your CV if you don't have anything else to talk about. Yeah.
Sure, sure. So, and then there is obviously the grades. So, grades, LOR, SOP, personal statement makes the whole application as like a complete package. So, according to you, what
Yeah.
percentage of weightage are given to each? Is it like almost equal, more of like a holistic approach? What do you think?
It depends on the country you're applying to. With the UK, there is a little more importance given to grades than the US. The US, I would say, is more true to the holistic admissions approach, wherein they really like factor in your grades. And with the US as well, it is important to have consistent grades. So if you did really well in 12th and 11th grade, but then your 9th and 10th grades are like lacking, or you're doing really well in 9th and 10th grade, and then in your 11th and 12th grade there's like a drop in your grades, that's more cause for concern. So with the US, you have to supply grades for 4 years, and you have to sort of show consistent aptitude over the course of 4 years. Whereas with the UK, you only give grades for your 12th grade and your 10th grade results. And in the UK, there is slightly more weightage given to the grades, in the sense that I would like to preface saying that with the UK, because there are clear cutoffs, right? So for the US, there are no specific subject grades. There's nothing that says in biology you need to have scored this much, in chemistry you need to have scored this much in order to secure ranking in our university. Whereas in the UK, there is that cutoff which says for biological sciences you need to have biochem math, and you need to have gotten an AAA, or what would be, I think, 80%, or something like 95% something. I don't know the CBSE conversions off the top of my head, but there are set grades depending on which university you're applying to. So the grade becomes a benchmark for qualification, and only if you even meet that threshold are they going to give your personal statement a read. If your personal statement is fantastic, but you don't have 666 IB grades, for instance, across your three subjects, you're just not going to make the cut. So with the UK, it is a little more clear cut. But it is definitely possible to meet the 666, have a poor personal statement, and be rejected. I know, like an acquaintance of a friend who basically had, I think, perfect grades in school. He got into a very competitive university. He got into LSE, but he didn't get into King's, for instance, which had a lower like cutoff grade. So it depends on that personal statement speaking to that university's admission team and them thinking that you are a good fit for that university. So grades aren't everything, but with the UK, it certainly is the first thing you want to meet.
Correct. Correct. I think in general, this is the main difference between India and abroad. That in India, like after 12th, especially, the marks is the entry point. There is nothing like a personal statement, recommendation letter, no interview, nothing. So personality and the writing skills and things like that doesn't come into play. Nothing like that. At least in
Yeah.
abroad countries, the weightage can be different, obviously, but there is some weightage given to marks, some weightage given to your personal relations in the form of LORs, and then there is a statement of purpose, which tests your real purpose, that what is it that you want in life and things like that. And then there is other things, obviously, here and there. And then this is also individual applications, right? Whereas in India, there is like a joint entrance exams for a lot of things, that one exam
Yeah.
and you get into like 100 colleges using the marks of that.
Yeah,
Sure, sure,
yeah.
sure. And when you were after you got into UCL, and you mentioned that before coming to UCL, before coming to London, you had like few solo trips. So that was during your school time only?
Yes, it was during my school time. I wouldn't say there were solo trips. I would just say I traveled alone, like got on the flight by myself, got off the flight by myself, but there would be someone to receive me in said cities. So I wouldn't say it was a solo trip, but I have had experience flying alone or traveling alone. The thought of checking in and checking out and dealing with that whole process alone does not phase me, is what I meant to say. But yeah, all of these travels were during my school time.
Sure, sure, sure. And when once you landed in London, and you had this weather changes, right? So you mentioned a bit of a depressing winter thing when sun was setting at 4 o'clock. So there was also a
Yeah.
time when sun was setting maybe at 10 o'clock, right? So how did you deal with that
Yeah.
reverse change?
I think the reverse change is a lot more pleasant than you would think, Vishal. I think the reverse is not a problem. It's the 4 p.m. setting that's really the problem. The converse, you're like outside and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm hungry. Wait, it's dinner time. Of course I'm hungry. It's 10 p.m. Right? And then you just go grab dinner. That's fun. Summer, I would say summer is one of the most beautiful times to be in a city like London. My relationship with London almost peaks every year during summer, and then during winter it's a little more rough. But we've got into a good place. We're in a good place right now. But yeah, it was a huge shift. It was a huge shock to the system, is how I would say. Which is why I almost have more respect for students that do masters in the UK, because they get 1 year, and they get 1 year to get it right. Whereas for me, I've been lucky enough to come here for my undergrad, goof up during my first year, maybe not manage my time best, not like know how to cope with things best, but then I have had second and third and fourth year to like do that again and again and again and get it right. But with masters it is a little more tricky, because you have 1 year, it's your first year over here, and you have to be on top of all of it. So if you are coming here for the masters, just keep that in mind. Don't let it scare you, but keep that in mind. But also give yourself grace if you're not doing the best. You're not, I guess, supposed to do the best. Like loads of people who come here, it is a pretty unanimous experience. I can, you can, probably tell from your podcast, like all the people you must have had on your podcast, people who are in the UK, they would have told you that it took them a little time settling in, and they didn't do everything perfectly and get it right away. If you do, amazing, props to you, you're doing much better than I am. But if you don't, you're with the majority of the population for whom it is a bit of a trial and error method. So allow yourself, don't be so hard on yourself.
Sure, sure. I think our podcast will help them, take advantage of the 1 year in the full-fledged capacity.
Absolutely, yeah.
Sure, sure, sure. And what are your future goals like? Like, what do you want to do in the next few years?
So the goal is to get into research. I would love to get into biotech research, so privatized sort of industrial research. That's what I'm looking at. Like I said initially, I'm really interested with like cell and gene therapies research. I think there's a lot of really cutting edge, interesting. It's a new area, right? There's a lot happening over there, and being positioned in London around UCL and the CGT research that happens here is really nice. Um, but yeah, we'll see where life takes me. I'm open to seeing, maybe all of a sudden I'm 10 years down the line, I'm not in research, maybe I'm in public speaking, you never know. uh, but as of now, the plan is to get into research as a career.
Sure, sure. So that's like industrial research, not like a PhD, right?
Yeah, I mean, I might do a PhD. I'm still like looking. I'm open to the idea of a PhD. I just don't know if doing a PhD will give me the kind of competitive edge in industrial research that it gives me with academia. So, with if I were to go into academic research, which was something I was open to initially, but if I were to go into academic research, having a PhD is kind of like a rite of passage. You have to have it in order to progress to other positions. Whereas with industrial research, it's not that cut and dry. But a large majority of the population still does PhDs, even with industrial research. So it's not something I'm discounting.
Sure, sure. And anyway, when you get into this industrial research, you might be actually liaisoning with the PhD students, for which your company is part of the consortium, like the collaboration as such.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So you will be working with them anyways, like, directly or indirectly, if you are into
Yeah,
research.
yeah,
Sure.
exactly.
So I see that you are like already, pro in giving pro tips, I think, and I think you have given a lot of tips, and you have been working as a part-time job or internship also in these things like mentoring students a lot. So coming to the very last question now, what will be some specific pro tips that you would like to summarize and give to the students?
Okay. Don't be afraid of trying and failing. Be open to trying. It is going to be scary, but if it is scary, you're almost doing the right thing. So try, be afraid, it's okay. Um, be just be inquisitive also. And it's obviously a great thing that all the people who are tuning into this podcast are already inquisitive and they're already trying to get these tips. And these sort of avenues that tailor to study abroad, like podcasts or study abroad opportunities, they're always a great resource. Do that as your first level of like research with getting exposed. So like Vishal and I, we're gonna sit here and give you these very tailored tips to study abroad. And we're here to do that. But also, if you just go online, you're going to have individual students giving you their one on one experience, be that through like YouTube videos or just Google, like student room forums or Reddit or whatever. You're going to always find a community that has gone through this experience and value that experience, even though it's not so apparent in the form of a podcast. There's a lot of value, and that's what I did. I didn't like tune into these podcasts, or I didn't know to tune into these type of podcasts. There aren't very many, I suppose. But seeing all these like YouTube videos of students applying to these universities, their applications, their strengths, what they did, them reflecting on their applications, those were definitely helpful in getting me acquainted with what it is that is expected of a study abroad applicant. So those type of resources are a lot more valuable than you might think at face value. So look at those type of secondary resources as well. And just talk to your teachers. Teachers are there. They You might think they don't know anything about study abroad because maybe no one's done it from your institution or your school or whatever. But talk to them, and you might find them to be a lot more helpful and willing to help than you might anticipate. And when you're here, which I hope you are, I hope you make it successful. When you're in whatever country you have to be, if it isn't perfect, that's okay. If you aren't being perfect in every single domain, if you aren't making best meals, 9 to 5 perfect productivity, weather peak, like, if it isn't that way, that's fine, as long as you just keep trying. Like I said, I think it all boils down to just keep trying.
Sure, sure. And what about LinkedIn? Like, do you have any tips for usage of LinkedIn, which a lot of school students don't use?
Oh yeah, I think I was very annoying on LinkedIn before I got into UCL. I was fairly active, I would say. I actually reached out to people who were alumni or current students at UCL and Kings. So when I said that it came down to UCL and Kings, right? How did I make that decision? I spoke to students from these universities outside of all the research I did, and having a LinkedIn presence definitely helps, because all you have to do is search UCL, and then there'll be like alumni tab, and then you'll find all these students, and then you can filter for the course that you are looking to apply to and just reach out to these people. And students are all like, students have been in your position, they know how scary and exhausting it is. So they're more than happy to help you, especially now that they have experience. So LinkedIn is a great place. Always having a LinkedIn presence is a great place. And it is also a good way of thinking about presenting yourself, right? Like, think of LinkedIn as your preliminary CV for even building your application. uh, Really like squeezing your brain every now and again, trying to update your LinkedIn profile will give you a good launch pad for building your application or building your CVs later on. Don't be thrown off by the fact that a lot of LinkedIn is corporate professionals or these like 30, 40-year-old employees, there's a space for you. There's a reason why LinkedIn's age limit is a specific age to a specific age, right? You can get on LinkedIn as young as you want. I had a kid who messaged me, I think he was in ninth grade or something, and he wanted to know about the international school that I studied in because he was considering between multiple schools. And even for school, he reached out to me, and now he is like going to a great school. He's had this great scholarship, so much potential, and he's realized that. So there are people out there. Put yourself out there. You're gonna get connected with people who want to help you, and then you never know where it'll take you.
Sure, sure. And that's how we got connected also.
Yes.
Sure. So thank you, Kavya, for your time and your insights and your tips. So it's great to have all this together in this podcast, and we hope our audience would learn something from this. So thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me on here.
Okay, have a good day. Bye.
You too. Bye bye.